Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. Apologies in advance if I don't sound 100%. I woke up today not feeling right, so it's just that feeling's kind of just lingered throughout the whole day. I've taken a cough drop so I don't end up going to a coughing fit during this vlog, but if at any point I just sound off, that's the reason why, so there you go, that's the heads up. But anyway, today we're going to be continuing our discussion of the Spider-Verse Team-Up miniseries as we take a look at Spider-Verse Team-Up number 2. And just like with last issue, we have a couple stories to cover. The first story is actually a follow-up to events that happened in Spider-Verse. Specifically, you remember what happened in Spider-Verse just before the safe zone wound up going belly up. The main universe Spidey wound up assigning Miles Morales and the Drake Bell Spider-Man from the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon the mission of gathering more recruits, giving them their own dimensional teleporters and cloaking devices so they could jump from world to world and gather more Spideys for the army. As such, while we did check in with them every now and then to see how their recruitment drive was going, the very first universe we saw them visit was that of the 60s Spider-Man cartoon, and while we didn't really see how things went from there after they entered that universe, well, that's where the first story of Spider-Verse Team-Up number 2 comes in. As for that story, called Too Many Spider-Men, it actually opens with Peter Parker being chewed out by the 60s version of J. Jonah Jameson, who just prior to the events of the story, got a call from one of his reporters that reported seeing Miles and Drake Bell Spidey swinging around. Now, of course, from their perspective, it's just two other Spideys running around, and Jonah being Jonah, he thinks that they're criminals, thinking that Spider-Man's getting a gang of criminals running around to start ransacking the city, and he wants Peter to go out and get pictures and get him proof. But Peter, well, he thinks that these are just two criminals out there trying to pretend to be Spider-Man and drag his name through the mud. So, of course, after he leaves the Daily Bugle, he gets into his own spider jammies and manages to intercept Miles and Drake Bell Spidey, who have just been swinging around the Daily Bugle building as... well, it's the only building in the city that has any defined details, because since this is the 60s cartoon, all the buildings are just kind of blocky and blend into each other. However, of course, when 60s Spidey ends up confronting Miles and Drake Bell Spidey, he immediately is accusatory towards them, thinking that they're criminals. And while Drake Bell Spider-Man tries to get hip with the jive, and talk with 60s Spider-Man like he's with 60s lingo, all this really gets him as a web blanket. However, before 60s Spider-Man can turn his attention to Miles, Miles does tell him, look, we're not your enemies, we're actually other Spider-Men from alternate universes, and we need your help because there's some interdimensional crisis going on, before Miles just stops himself halfway through and says, this all sounds insane, doesn't it? But this is the 60s. But this was back in the era when such ludicrous tropes were commonplace in superhero stories, so 60s Spider-Man fully believes their story. He's like, oh, wait, you guys are from other dimensions? Why didn't you say that in the first place? In fact, apparently there was a storyline, or there was an episode in the 60s Spider-Man where he did encounter a whole planet of spider people, so meeting two different Spideys from parallel universes doesn't really seem out of the realm of possibility for him. As such, Drake Bell Spidey, after they get the web blanket off him, does explain to his 60s counterpart about the Inheritors and how they're hunting Spideys across the multiverse, and they need 60s Spidey's help. And while he says he'd be more than happy to help them, well, he's kind of in the middle of his own thing at the moment. You see, just before Miles and Drake Bell Spidey arrived, one of his enemies, a supervillain by the name of Dr. Noah Body, whose gimmick is that he's invisible, get it, Noah Body, he's apparently just broken out of prison again, and he's brought with him several of Spidey's biggest bads. And so, he can't just leave this universe unprotected while that heinous criminal is out running about. Of course, Drake Bell Spidey just starts snickering at this because the supervillain is called Noah Body. But to 60s Spider-Man, this ain't no joke, and sure enough, shortly after he tells this to the two other interdimensional Spider-Men, immediately they are ambushed by four of his supervillains. In this case, Scorpion, Vulture, the Green Goblin, and Electro. Now, of course, Miles thinks that this is dangerous because of all the villains that they have, because of the villains, but, well, these are 60s era villains. Even 60s Spider-Man admits that these guys are their own worst enemies. They will get in each other's way, and they're just thick-headed and dumb. As such, Miles thinks, yeah, you're right. This doesn't seem like a big problem. Come on, let's just get him. But as all three Spideys begin punching out supervillains, well, they end up getting another sneak attack, specifically from the aforementioned Dr. Noah Body, who, since he is invisible, the only identifying marker that we see from him is a gun, a uranium-powered Futuro rifle, as he calls it. Which, while Miles thinks that it's powered by actual uranium, it's just a ray gun that's powered by a meteorite that came from the planet Uranus, which does get Drake Bell Spidey laughing a little. So all it really did was stun the various Spideys. But with one extra shot, it will finish them off. But immediately the supervillains start arguing over who will get the honor of taking out the Spider-Man, because they all want the street cred. However, as the three are arguing, immediately the Spideys start trying to figure out what to do next, because they have to figure out how to beat them. And even 60 Spider-Man admits that they can't really use the same method he used before, as prior he did use a bit of ventriloquism to screw with them, but he doubts they'd fall for it again. As such, while Drake Bell Spidey thinks that that's just a dumb method, but immediately Miles gets on both of their cases, stating that this is life or death. Don't you guys realize this? But 60 Spider-Man throws back at him. Look, I know all I need, and I understand that plenty. I've seen enough death in my life. It was because, as he goes on to talk about, well, the tragedy with Uncle Ben. As, yeah, while the 60s universe is typically ragged on for how silly it can be because of the era, you tend to forget that even in that era, the tragedy with Uncle Ben was still a constant, even for him. I have seen the first episode of the 60 Spider-Man cartoon, and yeah, the very first episode involves the stuff with Uncle Ben, and it does hit him just as hard as it does any other Spidey. And as such, when Miles hears that, he does realize, okay, yeah, maybe I've been too hard on you. You do know what you're doing, and we'll play things your way, but I got a plan, so hear me out. As such, while the villains start getting their acts together and decide, okay, you know what, there's plenty of Spider-Man for us to take care of. We don't have to be fighting over this. Immediately, Drake Bell Spidey manages to web the Goblin's foot and pull it back, causing him to trip and fall right into Noah Body, who immediately thinks it's a sneak attack and immediately blasts both the Green Goblin and the Scorpion, who was also arguing to get a crack at the Spideys with his Futuro Ray. However, this also leaves Noah Body open, as unbeknownst to him, Miles uses camouflage powers to sneak up behind him, and then before Noah can react, Miles zaps him with his Venom touch. Which also allows 60 Spider-Man and Drake Bell Spider-Man the chance to get back to recover from their own blast, as they manage to punch out the two remaining supervillains, and, well, the day is saved. The bad guys are beaten, they end up getting webbed up and left for the cops, and so the trio of Spider-Men decide to think that maybe it's time to get going. Though 60 Spider-Man admits that he does at least want to let his loved ones and his work colleagues know that he's not going to be around for a while. Which, even Drake Bell Spidey says that he might have a solution for speeding that along, since, well, he assumes that he and his 60 Spider-Man are alternate versions of Peter Parker, so he thinks that maybe, just maybe, if they look as alike as he thinks they do, maybe they can be in two places at once, which also leads to a very funny, kind of amusing moment where, when both Spideys unmask, they both look at each other and they're like, wait, you walk around like that? Because, again, you gotta remember that these Peters are from two different eras. As 60 Spider-Man looks very well kept, has a straight haircut, wears a suit. Where Drake Bell Spidey has a mullet and wears a jacket that he leaves open. So they both immediately think the other guy looks like an idiot. But either way, the plan does go off without a hitch. Apparently, the only real major detriment was that when Drake Bell Spidey went to go talk to Jonah, he called him a hippie and told him to get a haircut. But again, everything's all said and done. 60 Spider-Man is free to get going. And before the trio of Spideys leave, Miles does lament that he wasn't able to help them with this thing, but he admits that they probably have a harder time convincing people that he was Peter, as he unmasks, which does almost prompt everyone to, which causes 60 Spider-Man to react like, wait, hold on. It's like, and Drake Bell Spidey's like, wait, hold on. I hope Spider Madman here isn't like a 60s guy in the bad ways too. And then 60s Spider-Man goes on to say, a high school kid? Well, the way you were talking, you seemed like you knew more about you could handle yourself. You seemed older than you were. No offense, which actually does make Miles feel proud before he puts his arms around both Spideys and like, you know what, actually I think I am good at this. Okay, Spidey's actions is our reward. Let's go save the multiverse. And the story ends with the trio of Spideys going off to continue recruiting Spider-Man, with Drake Bell Spidey telling us to go and read more of to be continued in Spider-Verse, which, yeah, that things just get more insane from there. So there you go. That's our first story. The second story, though, is actually one that takes place once again during the build-up to Spider-Verse, as the Spider armies are recruiting or getting more recruits. In this case, we open on Spider-Gwen as she's actually getting ready to recruit another Spidey, or in this case, a Goblin. Yeah, it turns out in this reality, the Spider Totem is actually a Goblin. I mean, he still has enough identifying markers so you can tell he's this world Spider person, as the Goblin skin is blue and the outfit, rather than being purple, is red, with some clear indicators in there that it's Spider themed, as the tip of his hat has webs coming out of it, and under his arms are webs as well. But yeah, this world Spider person is a Goblin and not a Spider-Man. Which even the title of the story kind of remarks on this fact, as it's called A Spider in the Dark. And basically the story opens with Spider-Gwen and this Goblin just kind of fleeing through a sewer tunnels as something is pursuing them. And while Goblin Spidey immediately thinks that they're going to get the drop on them, as he grabs a pumpkin bomb and throws it behind them to hopefully throw off their pursuers, all this really does is just tick them off, as we see who their pursuers are. Verna and a couple of her pets, specifically feral versions of the Rhino and Scorpion. As such, in the midst of the commotion, Spider-Gwen managed to grab the Goblin Spidey and pull him into a tunnel, but once they have a moment to themselves, immediately the Goblin Spidey wants to know what the hell is going on. Who's this lady that's pursuing them? How is this all... Why is she chasing after them? And furthermore, who is Gwen? Because she clearly knows who he is, but he has no idea who she is. And yeah, we clearly see that this is actually an alternate version of Peter Parker, as he pulls off his mask and we see him underneath. As such, Gwen decides to reveal her own identity as she pulls down her hood and unmasks, and reveals she is an alternate Gwen Stacy. And the instant Peter sees her, he looks horrified. And it's here that we learn exactly what the divergence point between this universe and the main Marvel universe is that resulted in this Spider-Man becoming a Goblin. It was the death of Gwen Stacy. Now, as I mentioned, the death of Gwen Stacy is one of those big defining moments in Spider-Man history, as it was technically Spider-Man's fault that Gwen died, and her death has always haunted his conscience for years. Well, in this universe, it kind of broke him. After Gwen died, well, Spidey kind of went on a warpath, brutally murdering the Green Goblin, and based on his dialogue, it sounds like he didn't just stop with him. It sounds to me, because he talks about how he killed the Green Goblin, how he killed them all, which it kind of implies that he started going after all of his supervillains and started killing them all too. Basically, if Gwen dies, that they didn't deserve to live either. But essentially, after this world Spidey went on his warpath, well, he was racked with so much guilt and anger that he wound up abandoning the Spider-Man persona altogether, destroying the costume, and in the throes of his madness, taking on a new Goblin mantle. Now, whether or not he's a supervillain is up in the air. I have no idea, but based on what I can tell in the dialogue, it's clear that this Peter is still not exactly in the right state of mind. As even Gwen tries to relate to him. Look, I understand. I get what you're going through. In my world, I was responsible for your death too. And while Peter doesn't exactly want to hear that, Gwen does say, look, I can help. I have something here that can help you get back to the man you used to be. And she tells him about the dimensional teleporter and how she can bring him with to join the army and so forth. And for a second, it does look like Peter is listening to her and almost is considering joining her, but their conversation is interrupted as the tunnel they're in gets a wall blown through, and they're both knocked aside. And standing in the midst of the rubble is Verna, who can smell the blood of the spiders. However, as the dust clears, Goblin Peter immediately sees Gwen on the ground unconscious, and he runs right to her side, just hoping that she's not dead. But thankfully, she's fine. She's just a little out of it. She in the midst of her grogginess, she just says, "Hey, Peter, how you doing?" and he just says, "I'm fine, but I can be better," as he takes his goblin mask, slaps it back on, and proclaims that he doesn't think he can be the man that she wants him to be, but he can at least be better than the man he became when that guy died. As such, he gets back on his goblin glider, flies past the feral versions of Rhino and Scorpion, and drops a pumpkin bomb, just blowing them both away. However, as he flies at Verna, all she really does is just grab him right off his glider, slash him across the chest, and slash off his mask, proclaiming that he is not a man, good, bad, better, or worse. He is just her dinner. But sadly for Verna, this is exactly what Goblin Peter wanted. As she holds him up, she hears a click, he smiles, and as she looks down to see what he did, there's an explosion right in her face. Sadly, this does not stop Verna, but in the midst of this, it did give Gwen enough time to recover from Verna's attack. And so when Gwen sees what happened with Peter, she immediately runs to his side and is just horrified, like, no, please don't die. But as Peter is lying there on the ground from his injuries, he just holds his hand up to her and says, "Don't, please don't." And she says, "Oh, look," and basically she's just crying and saying, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." But Peter just smiles at her and says, "You already did," before he sadly dies in her arms. As such, with a look of determination and anger, Gwen glares at Verna and says, "He's dead, you're next," before she opens a portal and leaves this universe. In the meantime, Verna looks at Peter's dead body, who is just lying on the ground smiling, and she just says, "Well, I don't know what you have to smile about. Just waste of a good meal right there." But the comic ends with us looking at Peter's dead body, and yeah, he smiled because he at least got the chance to save the one person he cared about. So, okay, my thoughts on Too Many Spider-Men. This one is just silly, stupid fun. The real fun of it is just seeing these three different Spider-Men in the same room together and just the zaniness that follows. Because well, out of all three Spider-Men, we got all of them come with their own different varieties of zaniness. First, you have Miles, who is essentially the straight man that evens out both Drake Bell Spider-Man and 60s Spider-Man. He's the one that's most serious. He's the one that knows that the full implications of what will happen if they don't stop the Inheritors, and he's the one that tries to keep everyone focused and on task. Though at the same time, this also can result in him kind of looking down on the other Spideys, despite the fact that they're probably just as experienced as him when it comes to these things. Then likewise, you have Drake Bell Spider-Man, who, if you've seen the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, then you know he comes packed with his own brand of weirdness, because case in point, going back to the Spider-Verse storyline, when Drake Bell Spidey and Miles Morales enter the 60s Spider-Man cartoon universe, immediately Miles got hit with Drake Bell Spidey's brand of zaniness, because the instant he realized he was the 60s, he had a weird zany chibi daydream where he looked like a guy from the 60s, and apparently that was something that happened in real time, because the instant it was over, Miles was like, "What the hell was that?" And Drake Bell Spidey's like, "Oh, a weird trippy daydreamy sequence. I have them sometimes." And basically, throughout the rest of the story, while we don't see Drake Bell Spidey do things like that again, he does periodically break the fourth wall. When after he explains the whole situation to 60 Spider-Man about the Inheritors and ends it off with, "Yeah, come with us, comprende?" Immediately, 60 Spider-Man's like, "I don't know what that last word was. Was that French?" And then just immediately Drake Bell Spidey just talks to the reader and says, this guy doesn't seem like he's playing with a full deck or whatever," which prompts 60 Spidey and Miles to go, "Who's he talking to?" Like, I don't think he even knows. So I did kind of like seeing that, and just seeing this general immaturity and just uncanny valleyness kind of clashing with these two other Spideys who don't share that level of zaniness. But then likewise, you have the simple-minded 60s Spider-Man, which I have to remind you, his era of web slinging came during a time when weirdness was the norm in superhero stuff. It's why he so readily accepts that Miles and his Drake Bell counterpart are Spideys from other universes, because that sort of thing was more accepted back in the day. And before you say, well, comic books still have all that zany weird stuff, yeah, but as the years went by, they kind of grounded themselves more realism. People had more realistic reactions to these otherworldly stuff. And ultimately, yeah, they accepted, okay, these are our lives, and of course we're going to deal with this otherworldly stuff every now and then. But even then, when they encounter this sort of thing, there's always that little bit of hesitation that makes them go, okay, this seems a bit strange. But then likewise, you have 60 Spider-Man, who the instant he hears these other two Spideys, who at first thought were just people trying to pretend to be him, were in fact Spideys from other universes, he's just like, oh, that makes sense. And of course, because he still follows the tropes of the 60s universe, he still can be a little weird at times and kind of silly, which again kind of makes him seem kind of childish when compared to Miles, which, yeah, Miles looks down on it because of that. But again, it kind of is fun to see these three interact like that, because while Miles is the middle ground between both Drake Bell Spidey and 60 Spidey, that doesn't mean that that Drake Bell Spidey and 60 Spidey are not aware of the weirdness surrounding their counterparts. Like I said, while Miles is the guy that evens them out, when these two Spideys end up doing their own weird thing, and the other two, their opposite on the other end of the spectrum has something to say about it. When Drake Bell Spidey starts breaking the fourth wall, 60 Spider-Man is just as confused as Miles. When 60 Spider-Man admits that how he was able to trick Noah Body and the other villains the first time was through the ventriloquism act, Drake Bell Spider-Man's like, oh, what, the got your nose bit was too sophisticated? It's just kind of funny to see these two levels of insanity kind of clashing with one another, but ultimately had to be leveled out by Miles. But what still makes it better is that at the end of the day, despite these different brands of oddities kind of working off of each other, they also remember one thing. They're still Spider-Man. They're all still the same guy, and they all still fight for the same thing. And yeah, their methods may vary, and the levels of absurdity may differ from Spider-Man to Spider-Man, but at the end of the day, they all want the same thing, and it kind of helps put things in perspective when Miles tries talking to 60 Spider-Man and Drake Bell Spider-Man and get them to realize that they need to get their heads in the game, otherwise they'll die. And 60 Spider-Man says, hey, you don't need to tell me about that. Look, I've already seen my fair share of death. And then again, he recounts the stuff with Uncle Ben, which, again, you gotta remember, which I do like. Because while we all like to rag on the 60 Spider-Man cartoon and its level of weirdness and how out there it could be, especially since it is a source of plenty of memes that we've seen on the internet, at the same time, it was still Spider-Man. And like I said, I've seen the first episode of the 60 Spider-Man cartoon, and it did carry the appropriate level of weight to it. Again, like with other Spider-Man, the tragedy with Uncle Ben was still caused by Peter saying, well, screw that, why should I have to deal with that mugger? I'm me, I don't have to deal with anything anymore. And then likewise, it came back to bite him, and when he realized that Uncle Ben's death was on his head, it again hit him with the whole mantra of, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. So yes, while 60 Spider-Man could be out there and over the top and zany, again, what his creation was still very similar to what we'd expect from other Spider-Men. And ultimately, despite how uncanny valley his world technically is, at the end of the day, he still fights for the same reasons most other Spider-Men fight. So I do like to at least acknowledge that despite how over the top that can be, that there is still enough of the original Spider-Man in there that still makes him strong. That still makes him a strong character. And likewise, it's a similar case with Drake Bell Spider-Man. While Drake Bell Spider-Man is weird, to put it nicely, and while I cannot say I'm a fan of the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, I can easily say that I do like that he is with Miles when he tries to get their 60s counterpart to kind of see things on their state. Like even like when he acts weird, and when he tries to get on the 60 Spider-Man's level and jive with the flow and all that. But at the same time, even he's like, look, you need to understand what we're going through. That there's a serious threat going on, and we need you to realize the weight of the situation. Yeah, but yeah, and yes, he's still arrogant and weird, but at the same time, he's still Spider-Man. And I do still like that, and again, he does still try to put his best foot forward, and despite how crazy and over the top he is, he still understands the seriousness. It can be a little hard to get that, especially since out of all three Spider-Man, he's the most jokey and arrogant, even more so than the main universe Spider-Man. But at the very least, he is still trying to put his best foot forward, so I can respect that. So add on them eventually having to work together, and how they do manage to put the best foot forward to take down all 60 Spider-Man's baddies, and overall, it's just a fun story. I think one of my favorite parts is too when 60 Spider-Man does realize they're from other universes. He comments on their costumes, especially because if you've seen the 60 Spider-Man costume, you know the only parts that have webbing are the mask, gloves, and his boots, whereas the rest of the costume is just a solid red with a Spider-Man symbol on the front. So I like how he comments on how the other Spideys have more webs on there. It's fun. Overall, but yeah, Too Many Spider-Man, fun story. Great fun to see these three different Spideys contrast with one another, work off each other, and work. It's just silly, zany, stupid comic book fun, so I dig it, I like it. As for A Spider in the Dark, this story I think has what I feel was somewhat lacking in the Spider-Verse storyline, namely seeing mainly the stuff with Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker. Now we got a little bit of let me talk about this. One of the major strengths with Spider-Gwen is that because her secret identity is someone that Peter was so closely tied to, who he failed to save, it makes for some great drama. Because after all, like I said, the death of Gwen Stacy is one of those tragedies that has hung over Spider-Man's head most of his career, especially since he was the one that was technically responsible for her death when his webline snapped her neck. But what the thing is, in the main Spider-Verse storyline, we only got hints of how Peter reacted when he realized one of the alternate Spideys in their group was a version of Gwen Stacy, who was her world's Spider-Person. Again, we got again. It's not entirely it's not like it's just glossed over. Again, we see when because to kind of showcase how they were demonstrated in the main Spider-Verse storyline, when Old Man Spider was gathering Spideys to go and fold the superior Spider Army into their own, one of the first Spideys that he was going to bring was Gwen, but main universe Spidey threw it and just kind of shot it down because he didn't want anything to happen to her. And likewise, later on, when he was gathering Spideys to help him go and meet with Jessica, so he could give her the mission to go to Loom World, even Gwen kind of said, "Oh, now you trust me," before he said, "Look, I'm sorry." And we got that little moment where she said, "Yeah, the others told me what happened. You're Gwen. Tell you what, why don't we just protect each other?" Which, in retrospect, kind of considering what happens in the second story of this issue, kind of makes that sadder because she failed to save another Peter. So this could be like her just trying to have to come to terms with that as well. It's small, but it's small, and I did like it was there, but this one expands on it more. Because once again, from Goblin Peter's point of view and Spider-Gwen's point of view, they're looking into the faces of people that they could have saved. People that were extremely close to them, but never really but because of their actions are dead now. But in the case of Goblin Peter, whereas the main universe Spider-Man essentially had to take in the tragedy and move on, this one fell down the rabbit hole something fierce, going into a dark place, killing his villains before abandoning the Spider-Man persona altogether and becoming his world's next goblin. Again, it's tragic, and it's all what ultimately makes him meeting Gwen even more effective, because while for Spider-Man this was another one of the tragedies that helped kind of define his whole hero career. For this one, it defines his whole identity. Again, Goblin Peter broke when his world's Gwen died. He went on a warpath, and he became essentially the very thing he hated. And now he's seeing another version of Gwen, one who is alive on her own world, Spider-Person, and she's telling him, "I failed to save you too." Imagine how that would feel, seeing this person you failed to save and then learning that she feels sorry too. Again, considering how badly her death affected him in this universe, he does you can just see how much seeing her now is getting to him. When she says, "I was responsible for your death in my universe," he just says no and then looks away, holding up the mask like he's trying to hide behind it. But then as Gwen keeps trying to talk him down and say, "Look, I can help you. I can help you. I have something that can help you." From her perspective, this is her chance to once again to right a wrong. And it's actually a case of both of them in different regards. For Gwen, she sees this as a way to right a wrong because of how deeply because again, she failed to save her world's Peter, and this one is just so badly damaged because of the tragedy with his world's Gwen. And so for her, this not only is this a chance to save a Spider-Man that's been lost, but a chance to help a friend that she failed to help before. As she tells him, I can bring you back. I can make you the person you were before. And it almost works. She almost gets him, but then that's when Verna attacks. And likewise, that's when the tables turn. When Goblin Peter sees Gwen concussed and hurt, immediately he's like, I'm not going to fail you again. I failed you before. This time I'm going to do things right. I may not be able to be the person you want me to be, but I can at least be better than the man hit. But I can at least be better than who I am right now. As he immediately just charges at Verna and sacrifices his life just so that Gwen can get away. Again, yeah, and it's great. It's suitable. It's very sweet and sad and somber all at once. Especially when Goblin Peter dies and Gwen sees him dying once again, she still feels guilty because in her eyes she failed to save him again. But Peter tries to tell her, no, you did save me. Because for once, ever since he abandoned the Spider-Man persona, he feels like he did something good. He actually saved someone, and he not only saved anyone, but Gwen Stacy, the one whose death pushed him this far over the edge. For him to finally have a chance to undo that mistake, to actually help her, it helps take the weight and burden off of his shoulders. It's sweet and tragic, and I love that. Again, this is something that I think could have been better in the Amazing in the Spider-Verse book. Because again, it was briefly touched on, but from both main universe Spider-Man and Spider-Gwen's perspectives, the other guy the deaths of both of them, while having impacts on them, didn't push them as far over the edge as we think, as they don't really do anything stupid beyond Spider-Man saying Gwen can't come with us on this mission, which he immediately gets over the next time he sees her. And likewise, Gwen doesn't do anything stupid to protect Peter, though to be fair, in her defense, there's a lot of Peter Parkers around, so, which actually you don't really, but that also kind of fits back into this story. Because, again, imagine how Gwen would probably feel knowing that in all these other universes, the person that she feels responsible, whose death she feels responsible for, is in fact Spider-Man. And many of them feel responsible for her death. Imagine how that would feel for her. And we kind of see that exemplified again when she meets the Goblin Peter. Because, again, her death hit him the most, seeing him fall so far over the edge. Because at least with the other Spideys, she can at least be assured that in these other worlds, he is at least risen up and actually tries to turn tragedy into something heroic, like she did with him. But likewise, to see this one fall so far over the edge, of course she'd want to help him. Because no matter the reality, Peter's her friend. Of course she cares. So of course she wants to help him. Again, it's sweet. It's nice. I love the duality of seeing this Peter who fell so far over the edge, sacrificing his life to protect the one person he failed to save, and likewise Gwen putting so much effort into wanting to save him because of what happened with her Peter. It's sweet, nice, ends on a tragic note, but ultimately it does get you right in the feels, especially with the final shot of Goblin Peter's body as he smiles. Which, yeah, I'll also give credit where it's due. I like the design for Goblin Peter's costume. I love how it takes the Goblin design and mixes in a few of the Spider-Man motifs with both the colors and the webbing stitched in at certain points. So, good stuff. I like it. So overall, yeah. Issue 2 is fun. The first story, silly, zany fun as we see the three Spider-Men interacting with each other and duking it out with the 60s villains. And the second story has some nice somber set moments but also some really good character stuff for both of the Spideys involved. So overall, really good stuff. I like it. So, yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in Thursday as we look at the final issue in Spider-Verse Team Up and see exactly how the Spider Army managed to finally get their extra win. So, till then, hope you have a good day, and I will see you on Thursday. Take care.